Sorry, visiting fellow at the Brookings Center, Doha. First time you've joined us, and we do appreciate it. I've actually got one of your articles here, which you've written at aljazeera.com, and I'm going to start with a little quote, if you don't mind. You said, "As enticing as it is to imagine Bashar al-Assad and his cronies on trial for heinous crimes against the Syrian people, a reality check is in order." Tell me about that reality check.
Right. Well, if Bashar al-Assad were to be tried, it will not happen while he's in power. It's extremely difficult to pursue a trial, especially of a sitting head of state, and in an ongoing conflict as in the one in Syria. Even if Assad were to step down, the prospects of a national or international prosecution are quite weak. And as important as trials are, they are actually only one form of justice. And so the point of the article really was to highlight other avenues of justice that Syrians can pursue and that they have been pursuing, such as documentation.
I was going to say, can you expand on that for me?
Sure. So the documentation of violations, of testimonies, of stories of victimization of Syrians, they will ultimately contribute to sort of defeating this embattled outlook on Syria that we've seen for so long. So in the midst of this deadlock of peace negotiations, for example, the documentation of violations is sort of a hopeful avenue to take by Syrians and by Syrian civil society organizations, which is what they have been doing.
The peace, I don't want to use that phrase, peace process, because it doesn't make sense in this situation. But what's going on in Geneva does have to happen, though, doesn't it? Because for so long it's been political process. Only a political process can solve the problems in Syria. But even now the UN is sort of backpedaling a bit on that. Staffan de Mistura not talking about political transition and all that. So how does it move forward then?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the key sticking point in the peace negotiations is this notion of political transition. Now, of course, we know that the Syrian opposition, for them, the political transition means Assad stepping down. For the Assad government, of course, this is non-negotiable. And what's interesting is that when we talk about transitional justice in Syria or in any part of the world, the term transitional is also problematic, because what kind of transition are we talking about? A transition from what to what? Yeah. Not all transitions occur from authoritarian violent rule to liberal democracy. And
that hasn't exactly worked so far in other parts.
Well, exactly. Don't need to look very far beyond Syria to see that this holds true. And so it's a key sticking point, whether you look at it from the peace negotiation side or from the justice side.
This time around in Geneva, Geneva 4, the opposition is saying it wants direct negotiations with the government. That's different for a start. But again, the government's in a position of power now, isn't it? After the win in Aleppo, after Astana, after having Russia on side, it's not likely to go down that path, is it?
To go down the path
of direct negotiations? I mean,
well, I would say it's unlikely. However, this is why, again, to bring it back to the point of documentation of violations, this is something that doesn't need to wait for the end of the conflict to take place. It's a strategy, it's a resistance strategy that can take place during ongoing conflict, and it's extremely important in the case of Syria, which is a deeply polarized conflict, and in order to ensure that the preservation of the multiple narratives of victimization materializes in the long term.
Noha Aboueldahab, pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Really do appreciate that. We've also got a special series over at aljazeera.com. It is called "The Boy Who Started the Syrian War." Now, I think really that title enough should make you want to have a wee look at that, given it's a war that's gone on for 6 years and shaped not only the region, but the world in many ways. Anyway, it's about a 14-year-old boy who sprayed anti-government slogans on his school wall in Daraa back in 2011 and arguably lit the touch paper for what became the civil war. So have a search for that. Some interesting infographics for you there as part of it all. Search for "The Boy Who Started the Syrian War."